The engine was still whining when I realized something was wrong. Not, hit a stump, wrong, or, clipped a deer, wrong, but a deep, gut-sinking wrong that made my hands go numb on the handlebars. 1 second I was flying across untouched powder under a pale winter sun, the next there was a heavy, moving shadow in front of me, too tall, too wide, and very much alive. I didn't even have time to swear. The snowmobile slammed into it with a sound like hitting a wall of wet leather and muscle, and whatever I struck let out a roar that I swear vibrated inside my chest more than my ears. I was thrown sideways, skidding across the snow, helmet scraping ice, breath knocked clean out of me. When I finally stopped moving, the forest went dead quiet, the kind of quiet that feels loud. I lay there for a few seconds, staring up at the gray sky, trying to figure out if my legs still worked. The smell of gas mixed with pine filled the air. My snowmobile was on its side a few yards away, engine stalled, track slowly ticking as it cooled. Then I heard movement, heavy footsteps, not the quick darting sound of a deer or the light crunch of a coyote, but slow, deliberate steps that sank deep into the snow. My heart started hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. I rolled onto my side and pushed myself up just enough to see through the trees. That's when I saw it. It was hunched over, partially turned away from me, one massive arm braced against a tree. Even injured, it was enormous. Taller than any man I'd ever seen, shoulders so broad they looked unreal, like something out of a bad movie or an exaggerated campfire story. Its fur was dark, matted with snow and streaked with something that looked a lot like blood. It turned its head slightly, and I caught a glimpse of a face that was more human than I was prepared for. Deep-set eyes, a heavy brow, a flat, wide nose. Not a bear, not anything I had words for. I froze. Every story I'd ever laughed at, every blurry photo I'd mocked online, came crashing back into my head all at once. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the thing people joke about until they're standing 30 feet away from it in the middle of nowhere with no cell service and a wrecked snowmobile. My first instinct was to run, but my body refused to move. The creature let out a low, pained sound, not quite a growl, not quite a scream, and for a split second I thought it was going to charge me. Instead, it staggered, it took a step, then another, leaving deep, uneven footprints in the snow. It leaned heavily on the trees as it moved, like it was trying not to fall. I could see its chest heaving, each breath sending out little clouds of steam. It looked back at me then, fully, and I swear there was something like confusion in its eyes. Not rage, not pure animal fear, just shock, like it didn't understand what had happened any more than I did. I stayed still. I don't know how long we looked at each other. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time does weird things when your brain is in full panic mode. Finally, it turned and disappeared deeper into the forest, the sound of its movement fading until there was nothing but wind again. No dramatic ending, no final roar, just gone. When I was sure it wasn't coming back, my hands started shaking so badly I had to sit down again. I checked myself for injuries. Bruised ribs, a twisted knee, nothing broken. Somehow, I stood up and walked over to the snowmobile. The front end was smashed in, skis bent at ugly angles. Whatever I'd hit had absorbed most of the impact, and that thought alone made my stomach flip. I looked at the snow where the collision happened. There were marks that didn't make sense. Drag lines, huge footprints, and patches of dark red soaking into the white. Way too much blood for a glancing hit. Not enough for something to be dead. I pulled out my phone with hands that felt like someone else's. No signal, of course. I took pictures anyway, of the tracks, of the blood, of the damage. My brain was screaming at me to document everything, like evidence might somehow anchor this to reality. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every snap of a twig made me jump. I kept expecting that massive shape to come crashing back through the trees. The ride back was slow and miserable. I managed to right the snowmobile and coax it into moving, though it pulled hard to one side and sounded like it was dying. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every rise in the terrain made my pulse spike. By the time I reached the trailhead, my jaw hurt from clenching my teeth. When I finally got to my truck, I just sat there with my helmet off, breathing cold air and trying to convince myself I hadn't lost my mind. Telling people didn't go the way you'd expect. Or maybe it did. A couple friends laughed. One told me I'd hit a bear and adrenaline had filled in the rest. Another asked how much I'd been drinking. I showed them the pictures. The tracks shut a few of them up, but not enough to turn disbelief into belief. They just got quiet, uncomfortable. Nobody wants to be the person who says, "Yeah, that's Bigfoot," out loud. It's easier to shrug and change the subject. But here's the thing that won't leave me alone. I grew up in the woods. I hunt, I track, I know what animals look like when they move, when they're hurt, when they're scared. What I saw didn't fit into any of those boxes. Bears don't move like that. They don't have shoulders like that. They don't look back at you with eyes that feel like they're thinking. And the tracks weren't bear tracks. The stride was wrong. The foot shape was wrong. 5 toes. A mid-foot break. Details you don't notice unless you're staring at them in the snow, replaying the moment over and over in your head. The worst part is the guilt. Nobody talks about that part. If Bigfoot is real, and I'm convinced now that it is, then I injured one. Maybe badly. I didn't mean to. I didn't even see it until it was too late, but that doesn't make the memory any easier to carry. Sometimes at night I imagine it limping through the forest, nursing broken ribs or worse, and I feel sick. Other times I wonder if it survived at all. That thought hits even harder. I've gone back to the area since then, during daylight, with friends. The blood was gone, covered by fresh snow. The tracks had softened, blurred by wind and time. The forest looked normal, peaceful, like it had erased the whole thing. But the feeling was different. Heavier, like the land was holding its breath. I didn't see it again, but I found snapped branches high up on trees and twisted saplings that made no sense for deer or elk. Subtle signs, easy to dismiss if you want to. I'm not telling this story because I want to be famous or because I think everyone has to believe me. Honestly, I debated staying quiet. But the truth is, this happened, and pretending it didn't feels wrong. If you spend enough time in wild places, you start to realize how little we actually know. There are corners of these forests where humans are just visitors, loud, fast, and careless. Whatever I hit that day belonged there far more than I did. So if you're watching this and you think I'm lying, that's okay. I probably would have thought the same thing once. All I ask is that you keep an open mind. The world is bigger and stranger than we like to admit, and sometimes it reminds us of that in the most brutal, unforgettable ways. I went out for a normal ride and came back with a story that changed how I see everything. I didn't just hit something in the woods. I collided with the edge of what I thought was possible, and there's no going back from that.